Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Crushon, and I am the administrator of the Marion County Prosecutor's Office Victims Witness Area. The rights of victims are important, and it is for that reason in 1981, National Crime Victims' Rights was developed. Every year in April, we set aside the second week to commemorate victims' rights. National Crime Victims' Rights Week is observed annually. This year, it is observed April the 7th through the 13th. The 2019 theme is Honoring Our Past, Creating Hope for the Future. And this celebrates the progress made by those before us as we look to a future of crime victim services that is even more inclusive, accessible, and trauma-informed. Many great events are happening throughout this week. At this time, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our community partners that are present today. Of course, the Marion County Prosecutor's Office Victim Witness Unit, Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, their victim advocates, the Julian Center, Legacy House, Marion County Sheriff's Department, 911 Department, Families First, and Coburn Place. I'd like to also take this time to thank Damien's Lawn, Garden, and Landscaping for donating our flowers for victims and victims' families to take home after the event. At this time, I would like to introduce our prosecutor, Terry Curry.
Thank you, Linda. In the last couple of days, we've all seen the headlines from this past weekend. And we obviously had a horrible weekend of violent crime here in our city. And I have to share with you that as I see these headlines over the last 8 years, that for me personally, I pretty frequently feel guilty. And I feel guilty in the sense that I realize that prior to serving in this role and working in this office, that I never ever really looked past those headlines. I never saw past those headlines. It did not occur to me to any great degree that each of those headlines represented a family that was suffering a tragedy, that we had friends and fellow citizens who were experiencing incredible trauma. Of course, now in our office, the almost 400 women and men in our office see every single day and witness firsthand what occurs to individuals who have experienced violent crime, whether it's a sexual assault or domestic violence or families of homicide victims. That those individuals who experience that are very, very often angry, they are confused, and that they have experienced long-lasting and perhaps permanent trauma. And in our office, as I said, we see and witness this every single day. We resolve about 30,000 criminal cases a year. Our Victim Advocates Unit assisted 5,300 individuals in the last year alone. And so as a consequence today, I think what's most important is that we be mindful of the fact that it is our friends, it is our neighbors, it is our family who are experiencing these horrible circumstances. And in my mind, we should have a twofold purpose today. Number one, that the message of hope for and assistance for our fellow citizens should not just be a single day message, but it should become a year-round reality. That we should collectively embrace and support our friends and our neighbors. And the second purpose of today is to acknowledge the wonderful work of our staff, and in particular our victim advocates and our partner agencies are here today. Those who are there for the victims every single day 24/7, all year round. And in that regard, I particularly like our theme this year, and that is that we're going to honor the past, but we're going to have hope for the future. And no one embodies that message any more than our next speaker. Senior Judge Ruth Reichert transcends, actually, our hope for our honoring of the past and our hope for the future. It's my honor to introduce Judge Reichert. As a senior judge, Ruth has served as a judicial officer in the state of Indiana for nearly 2 decades. While serving as a judge and senior judge in Indianapolis, Marion County, Ruth's caseload has included major felonies, family violence cases, and civil protection orders. She has also completed 1 term as the presiding or chief judge of the entire criminal division here in Marion County. Prior to Governor Bay's appointment of her to the bench, Ruth worked as the deputy prosecuting attorney in Indianapolis, Marion County, more than a few years ago because she and I overlapped in the prosecutor's office at one time as deputies. And where in that office she helped establish the first specialized domestic violence court in the nation in 1986 and created the specialized unit of prosecutors, victim advocates, and investigators to handle family violence cases. She also piloted the office's Adult Protective Services Unit, which is responsible for investigation involving endangered adults. Before her most recent return to the bench, Ruth worked as the Indiana Supreme Court's Family Violence Resource Attorney, where she functioned as a single point of contact for the state's courts on matters related to civil protection orders, criminal domestic violence case processing, best practices, and training. Ruth holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree from Indiana University in Bloomington, a Master of Arts degree from IU in Indianapolis, a Juris Doctor's degree, a JD degree from IU Robert McKinney School of Law, and a Bachelor of Science degree from Ball State University. Not only is Ruth much, much better educated than me, she is also a wonderful person. Ruth?
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. As Prosecutor Curry mentioned, from 1985 to 1990, we started something in the prosecutor's office called the Family Violence Intervention Project. And that was responsible for a lot of the innovations that I'm going to talk about this morning. But our experience those 5 years when I was at the prosecutor's office and on into the 1990s proved that when you focus on victims' needs, that is consistent with a smart approach to crime, especially domestic and family violence. What I mean by that is, before we had a specialized unit for domestic and family violence, in the high volume courts, a lot of times prosecutors would not even realize that the victim was in the courtroom. Our victim attrition rate, which was the NALI 3 rate, where we had to dismiss a case because the victim did not appear, was upwards of 60%. More than 6 out of 10 cases got dismissed for lack of victim cooperation. After we started the Family Violence Intervention Project with the specialized unit, we were able to bring that rate down to lower than 30%. So we cut it almost in half. So you may ask what made the difference. The first thing that made the difference was victim advocates. We were able to get a grant to hire victim advocates whose only job was to reach out and partner with the victims from the outset, from the very beginning. And those advocates acted as a voice for the victims, not only in court, but within the prosecutor's office. The victim advocates stood up to the prosecutors and had uncomfortable conversations with us in our offices when the victim themselves could not be there to to represent themselves. And it was those difficult conversations that made sure that the victim's voice was heard, not just in the courtroom, but also in our day-to-day work at the prosecutor's office. The second thing we did was we instituted vertical prosecution. What that means is the same prosecutor who screened the case, made the charging decision, saw that case through to trial or the end of the case. And what vertical prosecution did is it made us really good at screening, and it made us take ownership of that case from the very beginning. That also helped see the NALI 3 rate reduced. The third thing we did was we had a very user-friendly citizen complaint office where victims could go from the beginning to see about filing charges in cases when the police could not make an on-scene arrest. You know, a lot of times with domestic violence, the suspect flees before the police get there. And so they're unable to make an arrest even though the law would permit them. So the police had a place, W131, where they could send victims where instantly they would be met by a victim advocate and shepherded through the process in a way that was compassionate, that had a lot of integrity, and that honored their experience. It was sensitive to the traumatic event they had just experienced, and it was practical. We could gather evidence from the very beginning of the case. The fourth thing we did in the late 1980s and into the 1990s was establish a child advocacy center that later became the Family Advocacy Center. And what that did, it offered another one-stop shop for the most vulnerable victims in the community, children and adults who had been victimized. It gave them a place to make a statement one time and only one time, and also to access resources from within the community to help them heal. Finally, into the 1990s, we established the Child's Haven Waiting Room. That was a joint project of the Marion County Courts and the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. The courts could not apply for a grant, so the Prosecutor's Office kindly agreed to receive the grant money that we were able to secure. But that was a waiting room painted like the inside of an aquarium, just for the kids of victims and witnesses, not just for domestic violence court, but for all the courts. And it was staffed by specially trained volunteers. It was a place where victims and witnesses could drop off their kids and not worry that the children would have to relive the trauma of the crime by sitting in court listening to their parents testify about what happened. You know, sitting on the bench as the judge, you get the best seat in the house. You get to see everyone in the courtroom. And I remember seeing the looks on the kids' faces when their parents would testify about the incident that brought them to court today. That is a look that you don't want to see, that 1,000-yard stare of someone who's reliving trauma. And to be able to get those kids out of the courtroom where they didn't need to be and into a waiting room where it was safe and a healing environment, that was a major accomplishment. All of these elements of our past bear remembering, and they should be honored. But more importantly, they represent a path forward into the future, especially after a weekend like we had where healing and accountability can go hand in hand with creating a more peaceful community. Thank you.
I want to thank Judge Reichert for those informative information about our history. At this time, the Mayor's Office Representative Cameron Radford will come and read our proclamation, followed by Marion County Sheriff Carrie Forrestal Forrestal with remarks, and IMPD Assistant Chief Randy Taylor.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Mayor Hogsett sends his regrets. He did provide a proclamation, which I'll present right now. City of Indianapolis, Office of the Mayor. To all whom these presents may come, greetings. Whereas Americans are victims to more than 20 million crimes each year, and crime can touch the lives of anyone regardless of age, national origin, race, creed, religion, gender, sexual orientation, immigration, or economic status. And whereas individuals who face repeat victimization and who fail to receive supportive services are at greater risk for long-term consequences of crime. The victim services community has worked for decades to create an environment that is safe, supportive, and effective. Intervening early with services that support and empower victims provides a pathway to recovery from crime and abuse. And whereas honoring the rights of victims, including their right to be heard and to be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect, rebuilds trust in the criminal justice and social service systems. This restores hope to victims and survivors as well as their communities, despite potential barriers including isolation, distrust of authorities, language limitations, lack of transportation, or cultural barriers. And whereas during National Crime Victims' Rights Week, we renew our commitment to ensuring that all victims of crime are offered accessible and appropriate services. The City of Indianapolis is dedicated to empowering victims and survivors in the aftermath of crime, building resilience in our communities and our victim responders, and working for justice for all. Now, therefore, I, Joseph H. Hogsett, Mayor of the City of Indianapolis, do hereby proclaim April 7th through the 13th, 2019, as Crime Victims' Rights Week in the City of Indianapolis, and I ask all citizens to join me in this observation. Thank you.
Thank you. Every year this event becomes difficult to attend because I think as a society we like to have upbeat things, and we know this is not an upbeat thing we come back every year to recognize. I want to take note of the importance that we recognize this, and hopefully that each year the crowd would be smaller, but we know that's not going to happen because unfortunately there'll still be another tragedy, another victim, but we can hope. There's those among us who will commit a crime, some more heinous than others, some will even take someone else's life. But I want to recognize that the Sheriff's Office are aware of the pain that you feel. We may not feel the pain, but we are aware of that pain. From the moment you dial 911, our dispatchers deal with the stressful situation of the violent crime as it's reported. The appropriate law enforcement agency is sent to the scene. Our deputies work with the courts, the prosecutor's offices, various law enforcement agencies to serve the court-ordered warrants to take the people into custody. We serve nearly 15 to 20 protective orders every day in an attempt to stop future victims from occurring. We also house over 100 murders, alleged murders, in our courthouse, in our jail. We have the trials that we provide security for. Those are things that our deputies take very important to their day's work. We know that it can offer some degree of justice to what may happen to you or your families. We also have 1,700 sex offenders in this county, and we focus on that. I take that very seriously. The people are on the streets. The court, the correction system has decided they would be out on the street, but we do hold them accountable. We expect them to comply with those orders, or we'll start the system again and put them back into the jail. I want to continue to commit the Office of the Sheriff to support and recognize our victims and take any steps necessary to prevent future crimes. I'd also like to thank Marion County Prosecutor Terry Curry for taking a leadership role by continuing to recognize Victim Awareness Week every year with this event. Thank you.
So, 1975 was the first time I can recall being a victim. It was a 10-speed bike that I didn't lock up when I went to the store, and when I came out, it was gone. And I remember the thoughts that went through my head. The first was, can I find out who took my bike? And what will I do with them when I find it? I realized I was never going to get that bike back. But that hurt, because that was my first 10-speed bike. Minor in most people's eyes, until you come to November of 1998, when I get a phone call from the police department in Fort Wayne, Indiana, saying that my father-in-law had been killed by a 12-year-old. Now, I remember the thoughts that went through my mind then. Some were similar. Could I go out and find out who did it? And what will I do with them when I catch them? October marks my 32nd year in law enforcement. Most of my career in investigations was in sex crimes. So I remember seeing all those faces of those victims, both adult and children, that had to go through what they did with either being molested or raped. You never lose it. You never forget it. You never forget what you see. But I will tell you, there is also hope. Because that 12-year-old that killed my father-in-law has already served all his time. And I check on him regularly, and he hasn't gotten any more trouble. That's a blessing. I'm glad that his life is going better. Can't say that about all the other victims that I saw in my work in sex crimes. What I can say is this. I thank all the victim assistance people, all the court people that help people through those times. They spend time, they spend money sometimes, but they share their heart and their soul with those people. And sometimes I think that's the best we can ask for. Of course, we as a police department, we try to make that arrest. But there's no secret, we don't make arrests on everything, as much as we'd like to. But I'll thank you as well, because any amount of time that you have spent on your knees praying for one of these victims, any words of encouragement you've given to somebody who's been a victim, trust me, has been a help. I don't know where things end. There's always hope that we become a better community, that we stop the crime before it occurs. That's the goal. But the other part of that is we don't want victims to remain victims throughout the rest of their lives if they've survived whatever crime they've had. There's got to be hope in that. I think as a community, we can do that. But we do that by recognizing that if it happened to someone out there, it's happened to us as well. Indianapolis is a fantastic place. One of the reasons why I came here was because I felt for as big a city as it is, it really doesn't have a big town feel to it. It's intimate. It's supposed to be that way. I think we want it to be that way. That's what's going to get us through these things. That, prayer, and sticking together. I think we all have the capability of doing that. I've seen it in action. And my thought, my prayer, my hope is that we continue to move forward in that vein. And we make great things continue to happen in this city for everyone. Thank you.
Can we have another round of applause for, particularly for our victim advocates and our partner agencies? I want to thank our speakers, thank again our agencies for being here with us today, and also thank the City Market for allowing us to have the event here. It's worked out very well. In closing, I would merely repeat what I said before. Let's please all take the message of today and carry it through every single day of the year and support our friends, our family, our neighbors. Thanks for being here.